Okay, so wanted to look through all the Ascendancies. Don't understand a lot of the mechanics. The mechanics are unknown, especially here with the Warbringer. Like, they didn't mouse over any of the things that I wish they moused over, like break enemy armor below 0. Had they moused over that, we would have had more information regarding, because that node looks crazy. Like, if you see here at Titan, they moused over everything. But regardless. Got Anvil's weight. Break armor equal to 10% of hit damage dealt. If you deal like big hits, which, you know, on Warrior has like these like big wind up type hits, that's gonna be like substantial armor break every time. I don't know the exact values. It's maybe we're gonna be hitting like 20-30k with like an endgame build, but it seems pretty high because in a lot of the previews we were seeing numbers of like 200k over like extended periods of time because it's just like ticking up, right? But if we hit like 20-30k, like this is crazy amounts of armor break. I don't think like enemies are gonna have like, you know, 10,000 armor, so you pretty much get them to 0 very, very fast with Anvil's weight. And then 2 following up, because you can break armor below 0, which I assume works like penetration, but since they didn't really mouse over it, we don't know. Well, actually, it doesn't work like penetration in Path of Exile 2, because in Path of Exile 2, penetration actually can't go below 0, like in Path of Exile 1. It more works along the lines of something like exposure, you know, or like a minus resistance or something like that. So, yeah, this is I think 1 and 2 are insane. We have 3, which is Jade Heritage, basically makes you immune for a duration of time. So consumes all stacks of Jade, granting a buff for a duration that absorbs all damage from hits, but you can't move while you're encased or perform actions. But it's like a really good oh shit button. You can just press and yeah. So I suppose like it would be really good for if you ever want to learn a boss fight. And you're scared to like brick it or die or something like that. I don't know. You could like maybe respec a point somewhere and put it into 3, but I wouldn't really, you know, use that for any other purposes. Also it says gain a stack of Jade every second. But I don't know how many stacks of Jade you need to actually cast the spell. I suppose it's 10 stacks, hopefully. Or you know, if you get like 10 stacks, then it maybe then becomes like usable. Or maybe it works in a way where like you can press it, but a stack determines how long you can be encased for, right? So imagine, for example, like you have like 50 stacks, then you can technically stay encased for 50 seconds or something like that, right? But that also sounds a little bit far-fetched, to be honest. That doesn't really sound right. I think it's more of like you need 10 stacks to cast a spell, and then when you cast it, you're encased for however so many seconds, or until it's broken by the amount of damage the boss has dealt to you. Basically, I feel like that's how it's gonna work. And then we have Answered Call again, which is a big question mark, because what this does is it basically summons ancestral spirits when you put a totem down, right? And it says the ancestral spirits, each of your totems will summon an ancestral spirit minion to fight for you. If the totem that summoned the minion dies, then the ancestral spirit dies too. But what do ancestral spirits do? No idea, right? So the way that I see this node is there's 2 ways it could go. It could either be that the minion itself, all it does is deals damage to enemies, right? Like you summon a thing and it starts dealing damage. And if that's the case, I think it's terrible. Because you have no realistic way of actually scaling minion damage or any of that kind of stuff. And it feels like if you take this, then it's not very synergistic with the rest of your Ascendancy. But the second way it could go is the minions provide buffs for you. If they provide buffs for you, then it's potentially very, very good. Because, you know, I mean, of course it depends what buffs they give you, and it's all speculation as of right now, but presumably they would give it decent buffs because it's an Ascendancy node, right? So, and yeah, if we go by like how Path of Exile usually works, minions do not copy your damage ever. That's never been the case. And if it states minions, then that means that it's a minion and it will follow the same rules that minions do. So it will not copy your damage because of the fact that it specifically is tagged as a minion skill. GG are very meticulous with their wording and with their tag system. The tag system is like one of the most important parts about Path of Exile. If you realize that like tags in PoE are very, very important. And I really like that they've gone through all these skills and added tags, and you can also like click the tags, and it's basically like having a wiki in game. I think that is honestly like one of the best things for learning the game, because even in Path of Exile 1, a lot of the things, a lot of the knowledge is based off of assumption. Of course, the wiki puts a lot of work into clarifying those assumptions and reaching out to developers and just compiling all that information. But just having that in game is a game changer, because we don't have to like second guess anything anymore. So it's really, really great. Yeah, 4, bit of a dud for me, unless they give you really strong buffs. But then we have 5 and 6, which I think these are absolutely insane. If 20% of the damage from hits is taken from your wait, no, never mind. 6 and 7 are insane. 5 is followed. It's like what 4 follows up on. Yeah, 20% of the damage from hits taken from your ancestral totem life before you. So I mean, 20% DR. It's very, very nice. I think that's pretty strong. But I guess it'll like really play into like the totem playstyle if you want to go that way. Then you have 6 and 7, which I think are crazy. Now, how Renly training works is, I'm not 100% sure how it works, but I assume this is how it works. So, gain 40% of base chance to block from equipped shield instead of the shield's value. The way that I think this works is, you have a shield, and instead of it being 25% chance to block, it's 40%, and then it can be further scaled by the local block percent increases. So imagine you have like a unique shield that has very low base chance to block, but very high percent increased chance to block. Then potentially that would be like replaced by 40% and then scaled further, like beyond that. But the latter way that it could work would be that you just have 40% chance base chance to block regardless, and it's not scaled by local modifiers on your shield. Also allowing you to, instead of gaining percent increased block, have prefixes on your shield that do other stuff. So this kind of like hinges on the fact that if there are good prefixes for you to get instead of percent chance to block, it could be potentially very good. But yeah, it's a bit confusing still. But regardless, having 40% chance to block is really good. But what follows it up makes it really insane, because Turtle Charm says you have 35% less chance to block. So it's a less multiplier for all your increases. It's going to be quite hard to actually like get your block capped with this. But the benefit is that you can block all damage from hits while your shield is not raised. So currently in Path of Exile 2, block works in a way where it doesn't discriminate between spells or attacks. So you just have block. You just block, but you cannot block AoE damage or dots. So, for example, when a boss slams you, you're going to be taking that damage regardless of how much block you have. This circumvents it, so Turtle Charm allows you to actually block that damage. And that's crazy. That means that you can pretty much make like a block cap build like you can now in PoE 1. And if anyone's played with like Svolin or something like that, you know how insane that feels. And it's just nice to have this on also an Ascendancy that can build tanky, because of the fact that it's positioned, at the bottom left of the tree. It's going to get a lot of armor and that kind of stuff. So I think 6 and 7 are pretty insane. And then we have 8 and 9, which, again, this kind of hinges on the power of War Cries and how really, really good they are. So it's a bit of speculation, but 8 and 9 is almost like a playstyle of its own. And I think that's really, really cool, man. I think that's really cool, because, corpses explode in your presence when you war cry, dealing 25% of life as physical damage. I don't necessarily think that's that good, because it requires dead monsters to be around alive monsters. Excuse me. And that's not like a situation that often really happens, unless you could somehow like maybe desecrate or something like that. But we haven't seen desecrate in Path of Exile 2 just yet. But then 9 is crazy. It's ignore Warcry cooldowns. Now imagine if 9 and 8 were flipped. That would just be insane. That, like if 8 and 9 were flipped, this would be crazy. But regardless, I think it's still really good. Because again, depending on like how strong Warcries are, this could be like a playstyle of its own. Yeah, absolutely insane. The War Color, I think, is looking very, very strong. If I were to play this Ascendancy, the way that I would try to build it is I would go for 1 and 2. So you go for like very high physical damage. Like you're basically reducing the amount of physical damage reduction that the monsters have. So you're just going to be dealing more damage. Like if it works the way that I think it works, like you could just like penetrate beyond 0 and it just goes like that. This could like 1 and 2 could be like 90% more damage, right? Like it's crazy. Then you have Jade form, which is nice for boss fights if you want to learn them. Like if you ever encounter a boss fight for the first time, you could just unspec one of your nodes and spec into Jade Heritage. But I wouldn't necessarily take this, because I would actually go for 6 and 7 after that. So that would be my Ascendancy. 1, 2, 6, 7. And then I would go for Golem's Blood for a big 2-handed sword in one hand. And a big shield in my offhand, right? So you could go block cap, 2-handed sword, and just slam stuff. Deal tons of damage that way. And that's if I were to build War Color, that's how I would do it. That sounds pretty cool, actually. Okay, the Titan Ascendancy looks honestly really good. It looks much better than from the early reveals that they showed us. I was like really skeptical about the Titan Ascendancy. It actually didn't look that good. And I'm really glad that they at least moused over every single node here, because they didn't do that for the Warbringer, so I'm really glad that they did it for the Titan. We have Stone Skin, 50% more armor from equipped body armor. The values of body armor, like of armor that we're gonna get on body armor, like I have no idea how much we're gonna be getting. I don't think they're gonna be as high as PoE 1, especially with the new bases that they add in PoE 1. Also, I'm not really sure how many attributes you'll need to equip the highest level body armors. But I think that's not really a problem, since you're going to be a strength-based class and you'll just use a heavy strength armor. I mean, that's probably a really good node, but what armor values do and how strong they are, it's a bit unknown. We don't know. So, yeah, it'll depend a lot on that. It really hinges on how strong that is. But we have some really crazy nodes here, like 2 and 3. These look crazy. So 2 gives a 20% chance for slam skills to cause aftershocks. And aftershocks are a burst of area damage that occurs after the initial impact of the skills, causing them. If not otherwise specified, the aftershock will deal the same damage as the initial impact in the same area. Now, I believe like the reason why it's specified that it's if not otherwise specified is because things like earthquake, things like earthquake have like an aftershock element to them. So yeah, I mean, this is basically a 20% chance to deal double damage. The way that I see it, it's basically just like 20% chance to just cause your skill to repeat, which is, 20% more damage, right? So it's pretty good. But there might be some like extra mechanics that you can use from this. So for example, it'll also contribute to stunning. It's not just equal to 20% more damage, but it'll also contribute to stunning, depending on like how much stun, like how much your skills can stun and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's better than just 20% more damage. Earthbreaker is really strong, and then right after it, it says Ancestral Empowerment. Every second slam skill you use for yourself is ancestrally boosted. And ancestrally boosted skills have 10% more damage and area effect. Now, so that means that you're basically getting 10% more damage and 10% more AoE if you were to just like pretend like it does it every skill. So like the second skill is just going to deal more damage and more AoE. That's really cool, but it kind of hinges on whether ancestrally boosting skills is like, if this is the only way to ancestrally boost skills. So if there's like a Warcry or something that ancestrally boosts your skill, then this Ascendancy kind of is a bit sus. But I think it's probably not gonna be the case, because like, why would they have an Ascendancy that ancestrally boosts your skills when you can do it in other ways? So yeah, Ancestral Empowerment seems really good with Earthbreaker. But Earthbreaker, like, I think Ancestral Empowerment damage values are really low, considering that it's just like 10% more damage, right? It's like 20% more damage on the second hit. I don't know, it's not that much damage, honestly. I'm not super impressed by this, but I think 20% chance for slam skills to repeat, that's really good. So yeah, you kind of gate kept here. Well, you're not gate kept at all, rather. Like you could probably just like pick up 2 and not grab 3 if you don't want it. But the AoE is really cool. So yeah, you could just basically get 2. So that's really nice, having aftershocks on the first node. So that's probably like a node that you'd want to take for sure. Someone is mentioning that Fist of War supports ancestrally boosts a skill every 6 seconds. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you have like a very slow attacking build, then that's kind of cool. But yeah, so I suppose ancestrally boost is something that is very rare that you can't get outside of maybe Fist of War support or ancestral empowerment. So it could be pretty good. Then we have Colossal Capacity, which is just, in my opinion, just a meme node. The entire, like, I feel like this node is here just to gatekeep number 5. It says carry a chest, which adds 20 inventory slots. That's, you know, yeah, you just get 20 inventory slots extra. It's a complete meme node. To have that as part of an Ascendancy, I don't really like that. I feel like this should just be, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, honestly. But then we have Hulking Form, which potentially is like one of the strongest passives of any Ascendancy, which gives you 50% increased effect of small passive skills. Now, small passive skills are, you know, all the travel nodes on the tree, the attribute trees, the attribute nodes, like all of that kind of stuff. And that's all going to be boosted by 50%. But the sad part is that, like, we have every travel node is 5 attributes, right? It's not 10. So what happens in Path of Exile is that it rounds down. So that means that you're going to be getting 2 extra attributes per node, instead of 3, right? Or 2.5. So yeah, it rounds down to 2. So you're getting like a little bit less effectiveness from attribute stacking from this, which I think is probably by design. And also, we don't know much about like how powerful small nodes are yet on the tree, because they haven't revealed the passive skill tree as of yet. But Hulking Form can have like some crazy potential for like some endgame meme type builds. The way that I see this is it kind of feels like an endgame unique in a way. Like it's the type of power that you'd see on like an endgame unique in Path of Exile 1. So yeah, I think that's really cool. That's a really cool Ascendancy node for sure. 6 and 7, this is the stun part of the tree. So it's going to be, your hits are crushing blows. And as you can see here, crushing blows cause heavy stuns on enemies that are primed for stun. And primed for stun basically is like you have to meet a specific threshold. Once you meet that threshold, the enemy is basically in the state of not being stunned, but ready to be stunned. And you can see that the thresholds here are 40% for normal monsters, magic monsters are 60%, rare monsters 70%, and uniques 80%. That means that you can't just like heavy stun uniques like on cooldown. But yeah, it's a very strong mechanic, because this also allows you to exploit this by, for example, if we look at like Bone Shatter, it says that like the strike will cause a heavy stun on enemies that are primed for stun. So as if they're primed for stun and you use the ability, it causes them to be heavy stunned. So like if you ever notice yourself getting to like 80% threshold on a boss, you want to use an ability like Bone Shatter or whatever else can exploit a heavy stun. But upon causing a heavy stun, it will also create a shockwave, dealing a large amount of area damage. It will cause like an explosion basically. So that'll be very good for clear, and presumably there's going to be like other skills that are very strong for exploiting that on single target too, right? So yeah, that's a really strong node, because it allows you to get to that state of heavy or prime for stun faster than other Ascendancies. And yeah, and what's following up from it is that 40% more damage against heavy stunned enemies. So anytime you actually are in a state of heavy stun, you're just dealing 40% more. So yeah, that means that you can probably unleash things like Fist of what is it called? Like Fist of War. That's not Fist of War. Hang on. Or is it Hand of I forget what it's called, but the Hammer of Justice or some shit like that. Hammer of the Gods. That's what it's called. There it is. In PoE 1, it's called like Fist of something. I forget what it's called. Yeah, Hammer of the Gods that just deals like a huge amount of damage. And you just like put that into your like little heavy stun window and just deal crazy amounts of damage. And then hope that it causes an aftershock, and then that repeats with a 20% chance, and you just nuke the boss in one go. Just sounds pretty fun. And then Mysterious Lineage, 15% more maximum life. We're gonna be getting a ton of flat life from a lot of sources, because how else are we gonna get life, right? There's no percent increase on the tree. It looked like rings would even roll up to like, when they showed the Chayula ring, it rolled 174 if I remember correctly. Like if you can get 174 life, maximum life on a ring, it means that the body armor is gonna be like, I don't know, 300. Is 300 crazy? Like, yeah, I mean, maybe 300 on body armor, maybe a bit more, but yeah, you know, increasing that by 15% is crazy. So Titan is honestly like a very, very strong ascendancy for the heavy stun playstyle, but also just because you can go for like different avenues. Like you can actually, if armor is really, really strong, you can spec into 1. It seems versatile because you can pick and choose between these. Now I know 5 looks very, very good, but it's not something that I would go for first ever. Like this is an endgame build node. Like once you have fully planned out your passive skill tree and you know exactly what you're doing, or there's something that you want to exploit on the passive skill tree from a small node, that's when you go hulking form. But it just seems that like I would personally, you know, begin with like going for like number 2. If I was like the first node that I would take is number 2, because it just, you know that you're going to be getting extra damage from that. 20% chance to deal double damage just instantly right off the bat, just going to boost your campaign as well as making you stronger overall. But it also hinges on like how much crushing impacts will impact your playstyle as well, right? So number 2, number 6, number 7, very, very, very strong, and number 8 as well. But that is kind of like what I would go for. I would go for like 2, 6, 7, and 8. And then maybe once I had like a crazy endgame build or something like that, you could go for like 4 or 5. You would always want to have 2, I think, and 8 though. 2 and 8 are just too strong. But 3 is really nice as well because of the AoE and that sort of stuff. But it seems to be a pretty versatile ascendancy, so yeah. You're gonna see a lot of interesting stuff coming out of node number 5. Though I'm gonna say it, guys, I think it looks a little bit overrated. I think number 5 looks a little bit overrated, especially since people are really bat chesting this node, but we haven't seen any small passives at all yet. Like we haven't seen small passive skills. So how can you be excited about this? We're going off of the assumption that small passive skills are exactly like they are in PoE 1. And if that's the case, then yeah, it's pretty good. But yeah, who knows? We're looking at Stormweaver now. Stormweaver is like super generically strong for spells. And the strongest thing about it, like that I see, is Scouring Winds. Scouring Winds, if it works like we think it works, right? I was just discussing it a little bit with my chat, and like exposure you inflict lowers the affected resistances by an additional 20%. Because it says additional, we suspect that it's just an extra 20% negative resistance added to the base exposure, which I'm not really sure how much that is. But if we were to look at something like Frost Bomb, right? So if I find here where I put that, I might have actually closed it. But anyways, if we were to like base it off of Frost Bomb being negative 15 resistance, so if we go to the PoE 2DB Frost Bomb, you see that it applies 15 exposure, minus 15 exposure. So that minus 15 exposure would become minus 35 with this. It's really strong because penetration in Path of Exile 2 cannot go below 0, whereas exposure can. And on top of that, what's crazy is that now you have ways to multiply this. So you have magnitude of exposure, which we're looking on the tree, and so far they've only really spoiled one of them. But it's right here. You can see that I will take a screenshot and put it over in the paint real quick. You can see here, electric amplification says 25% increased lightning exposure effect. So this would be multiplicative with that. And it's just so much more powerful because of the fact that your base is now 30 instead of 10. So you're effectively like multiplying the effectiveness of these nodes, exposure effect nodes on the tree by 3 by taking Scouring Winds. So you can get to like very high resistance, like reduction on monsters and stuff like that. But I think Scouring Winds is the reason why you go for Stormweaver. It just seems crazy. It seems very, very, very strong. Scouring Winds. Now, Tempest Caller, on the other hand, does not look very good. It does not look very good because there's some things that feel contradictory to how you would build your character. So what Tempest Caller does is it triggers elemental storms on critical strike or critical hit with spells. And it creates a stationary fire, cold, or lightning storm at the target location for a duration based on the highest elemental damage type from the hit that triggers the storm. So if you're a fire-based build, you're just going to be triggering firestorms, etc., etc. Hits which do not deal elemental damage will not trigger the storm. So you obviously can't go for physical damage and just trigger storms and stuff like that. But the thing that's contradictory that we were looking at just a minute ago, if I can find it here real quick, is based off of a leak right here. It's a bit blurry because it just comes from like a leak, but essentially what that says is that, first of all, it cannot critical strike, right? So Elemental Storm cannot crit, and it has a base duration of 5 seconds but a cooldown of 5 seconds. So to even like justify using this, you would have to get a lot of cooldown recovery for the skill itself. And on top of that, since you are building a lot of critical strike to feed, or to trigger it and stuff, and it cannot crit, you're kind of like losing an entire like scaling vector that you would otherwise have with basically like any other type of trigger. And you think to yourself, well, like that's not really a problem because you're kind of like getting it for free. But the problem is that there's nothing free in Path of Exile. Like you're speccing into it, and not only you're speccing into it, but if you take Tempest Caller, you want to take Rain Dancer, because without the more cooldown recovery rate, it just kind of sucks. Like triggering once every 5 seconds is not good. The saving grace for these two nodes is the potential for the base damage to go crazy with gem level scaling. But this is a level 9 gem and it has 12 to 19 physical damage. And of course it has like physical damage conversion depending on which element you hit with. So yeah. Now I could see this being like strong where like you get a lot of cooldown recovery rate and all of a sudden you have like 4 storms under a boss and it just melts them. But as I said, I think it just feels a little bit contradictory in the way that you would want to build, because it feels like a skill that is designed for crit builds, but then it doesn't crit. So all that critical strike multiplier that you stack just doesn't apply to it whatsoever. But you need the crit to trigger it in the first place. And it costs you half of your Ascendancy points if you take 2 and 3, right? So I don't think it's that good, unfortunately. But that's okay because the rest of the nodes are actually insane. Now we have Heavy Snow. This is pretty good. The target can be affected by 2 of your chills, and those chills just basically stack additively. So if you have a 10, if you chill for like 10% and another chill for 10%, together they will be 20. Your chills can reduce up to a maximum of 35%, and because it specifies chills, that means like multiple chills up to a maximum of 35. That means that you cannot go beyond 35. Now, whether you can go beyond 35, if there are ways to increase that somehow, like through magnitude, right, or things like that, we'll have to see. But it also does come with the downside of 25% less magnitude of chill. And we also don't know exactly whether you can actually chill bosses up to your maximum of 35. Maybe it's the case that bosses just cannot be reduced below a certain amount, but then that would kind of mean that it kind of sucks a little bit. But yeah, still to be seen how it works mechanically. I kind of really wish they like hovered over these things as well, and that we would get clarification on how they work. But yeah, And the one following that is the Shaper of Winter, which basically means that any kind of damage can chill. So if you have like fire damage, it can chill, right? It contributes to chill. So regardless of what type of damage you deal, you're gonna be able to chill. And then going to the next one, Strike Twice. This one is crazy good. This one is really, really good. So Strike Twice, targets can be affected by 2 of your shocks at the same time. This can basically mean that, again, much like the chill node, they just stack additively. So if you have a shock of 20% and another shock of 20%, they stack to 40% shock. How much shock we can get, how much maximum shock we can get, I'm not really sure just yet, but yeah, it's really, really good. But you do have less shock duration, so it kind of means that you need a build that is able to apply those shocks, relatively quickly. I don't know what the base duration is, but base duration of things generally is like recently, which is 4 seconds. So yeah, I would assume it's like 4-second base and then modified from anything on the passive skill tree or anything like that. The Strike Twice seems really, really good actually. And you have Shaper of Storm behind it, which is like we have the same node that we have in Path of Exile 1. All damage from hits can contribute to shock chance. So you can play like a cold damage build and full shock. Now we have some really crazy nodes with Arcane Surge. Arcane Surge now grants 10% more cast speed and 20% more mana regeneration. Mana regeneration is going to be very important in PoE 2. It's going to be very, very important in Path of Exile 2 mana regeneration, because outside of your mana flask, you do not have ways to recover your mana from what we've seen so far. The only place where we've seen any kind of like leech or stuff like that is from physical damage, physical attack damage specifically. So getting mana regeneration is going to be very important. Now, whether you can scale your Arcane Surge further, like whether there's like effective Arcane Surge, we do not know just yet. But regardless, having Arcane Surge up all the time, like unconditionally, is really good, really strong. A lot of damage from the cast speed and a lot of mana recovery from the more mana regen, which is multiplicative with all your increases, and we have seen a lot of increases on the passive skill tree. We have seen a ton of those. And the one behind it is a more of a mana stacking node, which is 9, which is 1% increased Arcane Surge on you per 15 maximum mana. So if you're a mana stacker, you're going to be getting like a crazy amount of increased effective Arcane Surge, which goes into what I was saying before, like how you can scale this. Now, whether you can scale it on the tree, if you can scale Arcane Surge on a tree, this kind of loses a little bit of its value, but it does give you a mana scaling vector. So that's really cool. So you'll be able to just like scale your Arcane Surge further that way. And we have 10, which actually I think is really strong, because we haven't seen any sort of energy shield leech or any kind of stuff like that. Give you 40% of elemental damage taken recouped as energy shield. Recoup is now over 8 seconds instead of 4. But still, recovery seems to be very, very expensive, or not expensive, but it's a premium in Path of Exile 2. So having this recoup seems really nice, especially if you can actually, like shift your physical damage taken to elemental, and mitigate the elemental damage you take and stuff like that, and then you recoup to energy shield. So you just create a constant stream of elemental recovery, or sorry, energy shield recovery from the elemental damage you take, which is pretty good. What I would take on this Ascendancy, like I actually don't know what I would take. It kind of depends. Like if you're a mana stacking build, you would 100% go for 9. I feel like everybody needs to take 8. And I would probably go for the shock nodes, but 100% I would go for the exposure node. And it's really nice because you have the opportunity to do that. It's not locked behind anything. So I would 100% go for 1. I would go for 6 and 7 because that's the shock nodes, right? So you're just shocking. And 7 you don't necessarily need if you're a lightning damage build, but if you're a cold damage build, it's really good. If you're a lightning damage build, you can skip 7. But yeah, 1, 6, 7, and then 8, right? Those are the nodes that I would probably take. If I was playing Archmage, then I would probably be mostly lightning based, so I would skip 7 and I would go for 9 instead, and get that increase from there. So that's sort of what I'm looking at. 10 tentatively very strong, but I'm not 100% sure just yet whether you're able to shift physical damage taken as to elemental. If you are able to shift a lot of physical damage taken as to elemental, then 10 becomes insane. But otherwise, it's just good, I think. But it also hinges on like how good the recovery is from things like, you know, like energy shield recharge and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. The Chronomancer. The Chronomancer is an ascendancy that basically is going to be much about resetting cooldowns, cooldown recovery rate, and doing some cool stuff with time. I suppose that's kind of like the class fantasy here. You want to be playing a spellcaster with this, of course, and ideally you want to be stacking as many like hard hitting but cooldown abilities so that you can exploit the fact that it has, you know, chance to not consume cooldowns when used. It creates time snap, which time snap basically allows you to reset the cooldowns you have. Time freeze is an interesting one. Time freeze lets you freeze time. Let's just go here so we can see it. Time snap manipulates time, resetting cooldowns of other skills. And that includes all of the ascendancy skills that you get as well. Ultimate command, you know, which gives time freeze, releases a large wave that stops time and affects all enemies for a duration. Duration is lower the more time an enemy had time stopped for them. So it basically just means that you can't just have 5 Chronomancers in one party and freeze time forever is what it means. There's diminishing returns to freezing time, and it's going to be on an individual monster basis. Yeah, no cheesing bosses with that one. And then we have Footprint in the Sand, which gives Temporal Rift. This is the same skill that we currently have in Path of Exile 1. And what it does is it basically like you take damage, or you cast a spell and you have no mana, you hit Temporal Rift, you go back to where you were X seconds ago, which I'm not actually entirely sure how many seconds. It just says passively leaves after images of your recent past. Recent would assume maybe 4 seconds. Cast a spell to return to the oldest after image, teleporting to that location and resetting your life, mana, and energy shield to the values they had at the time. I think it's 4 seconds. Because recently in Path of Exile it's 4 seconds. Now, there is this thing, number 5, Quicksand Hourglass, and honestly, I'm going to criticize this node because I think it sucks. I hate pendulum style effects in all video games. All this reminds me of is something like Heartstopper in Path of Exile 1 currently, which is a node on Trickster that basically makes you take less damage on a cooldown, basically. It cycles between less hit damage and less dot damage taken, I think. I don't remember exactly. But it's very bad and nobody ever takes it. And this is like exactly the same. This feels like Convention of Elements. It feels like Convention of Elements from Diablo 3. I always hated Convention of Elements. Every 12 seconds, you gain 50% more cast speed for 4 seconds. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I would have much preferred this to be like just 10% more cast speed and not be a pendulum effect. But yeah, I don't know. The fact that it's a pendulum effect is really annoying, in my opinion, for like general gameplay. It just feels really scuffed. Then we have Apex of Moment, which says enemies in your presence is slowed by 20%. This node is honestly insane. This node is crazy. Presence is huge. So presence in Path of Exile is 8 meters, which you can see here. If you have a 1080p monitor, it would be at 80, right? So it would be basically like your entire screen is your presence. The entire screen, and basically they have 20% action speed, like action speed slow. I'm pretty sure slowed means attacking cast speed as well. They did not click on it, but I assume this is action speed. Now that I'm thinking about it, if it's not action speed, if slowed does not also count attack and cast speed, then this is really bad. But if it is attack and cast speed, then it's good. If it's just movement speed, it's terrible. It's very bad. So hopefully it's everything. Hopefully it's everything. Now that I think about it, actually somebody just mentioned that temporal chains has a similar effect. So if we look at the PoE 2DB and we look at gems and we search for temporal chains, we might be able to learn something. Temporal chains. Versus all enemies, lowering their action speed. No, action speed. I mean, it does say cursed enemies are slowed by 34%. Effect on curses expire. Slowed. If it says reduces their action speed and then slowed by 34%, it's very possible that slowed equals action speed reduction. So if that's the case, it's really good. And then we have Circular Heartbeat, which is 30% of damage taken recouped his life, which is really, really good. 30% of damage recouped his life. And then the one after that, which says recoup effects instead occur over 4 seconds instead of 8, which is the baseline. So you recoup twice as fast, you get 30% of your life recouped. And on top of that, there's presumably going to be a lot of recoup on the tree that basically doubles the effectiveness of recoup number 8. So I would really think that recoup, this is more of a recoup ascendancy than a cooldown ascendancy. But it does have some cool little cooldown things that you could do, potentially, depending on if there are really insane cooldowns that we can cast. But if I was to choose the ascendancy, I would probably play a spellcaster, of course, because you are on the top side of the tree and you want to really play into that, you know, into that fantasy. A lot of people are saying like hammer, you know, playing the hammer build. But the problem with the hammer build is that you'd have to travel like 20-30 nodes to even get to like attack nodes on the tree. I don't think it's viable, especially to start with. But the nodes that I would go for is I would go for number 1, you know, for the 33% chance to not consume cooldowns when you use them. And then I would take 6, 7, and 8. Enemies in your presence are slowed by 20%. That's just kind of crazy, right? Like, if everything is slowed by 20%, just basically 20% damage reduction in a way, right? Like, if you look at it that way. 30% of damage recoups his life, then recoup effects over 4 seconds. If you wanted to drop anything, it would probably be 6, which kind of sucks. But you would drop 6 for 2, which is Time Snap, which makes you reset your cooldowns. And then on top of that, it's like you have a 33% chance to not consume that. So this would mean that like 1 in every 3 times that you click this, you can click it again. So you can kind of maybe have moments where you end up being able to press one of your big cooldown abilities like 3-4 times in a row if you're lucky or something like that. So yeah, interesting ascendancy, but it all hinges on the big cooldown skills. I personally wouldn't start this myself, but that's just me. Alright, so we're taking a look at the Witchhunter ascendancy, and the Witchhunter is kind of interesting because it introduces like the concentration mechanic, which is completely unique to it. I really do wonder whether there's going to be other ways for us to actually have concentration or access it in any kind of other way, but as of right now, it's all we know is that it's basically unique to the Witchhunter. So yeah, but there's quite a few interesting things now. We'll just go through the nodes. The first one is Weapon Master. This node, in my opinion, is kind of sucks. 20 extra passive skill points become weapon set passive skill points. It's not like you're gaining 20 extra passives. It's just that you gain access to being able to have 20 more passives in your second off weapon skill set. So yeah, we don't know what the base is now, but let's say we have a base of 20. That means that you'll be able to swap 40 passive skills to your other weapons. So it'll be a more weapon swapping type playstyle. Number 2 is Pitless Killer, and that's going to be on this branch right there. So you see I have 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 and 8. So 1 and 8 are independent and the rest are one after the other. So we can go to Pitless Killer, which gives Calling Strike, and Calling Strike is not the same as it is in Path of Exile 1 because it's different per different monster that you're killing. See that Calling Strike is now at 30% for white monsters. For magic monsters is 20%, rares at 10, and uniques at 5. So it just gets worse and worse the higher the rarity of the monster is. And yeah, the thresholds are checked before the damage is dealt, so it kind of means that like so long as you were to enter the threshold of less than 5% after your hit, it's going to be called. So yeah, it works like it does in Path of Exile 1. Now, I think Calling Strike itself might be good depending on the passive skills on the skill tree, because there are Calling Strike magnitude passive skills. So increasing that beyond 5%, you know, if you can get that to 10%, it'd be pretty good. But that means that you have to get like 100% increased Calling Strike effectiveness, which I don't think there's any way you'll be able to get that, because that means that you'll be calling white monsters at 60% and magic monsters at 40%, which seems crazy, right? It doesn't seem like that seems crazy. Like even just getting this to 10% means you'll have 60. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But what's good about it is that you have Decimating Strike behind it, which Decimating Strike is actually pretty damn good. It has a range from 5% to 30%. So on the first hit that you deal to the monster, you will take away anywhere between 5 to 25% of their life from that hit. That's really strong. That is really strong. So you can imagine that, like, yeah, if we are like culling white monsters at 60%, if we were to get double effectiveness of culling strike, then you have decimating strike on top of that. That means that every monster is going to be left at 10%. So it seems like the clear on this character is going to be very good with these two nodes if you get a little bit of culling strike effect. But the question is, like, single target, how will that feel against, you know, rare and magic monsters and that kind of stuff? Which, to me, if you were to ask me, like, for me, the only time damage really matters is when you're killing rares or uniques. But this Ascendancy tends to give you more damage versus non-rares or uniques, right? Like, who needs more damage to clear trash? Not really a thing that you realistically ever need. But it does play into one of the other nodes that we'll see later on, which is, you know, the thing that most people are excited about for this Ascendancy. But yeah, Witchbane, which is the concentration mechanic that I was talking about a little earlier, that seems really strong. It works as it's kind of like action speed, but for abilities. Enemies have less cooldown recovery rate, lowered their concentration scaling up down to 50%. So enemies will queue attacks and they will queue them 50% slower. So you might have like bosses which are kind of just like standing there not doing anything, waiting for their concentration basically to be able to attack you or do an ability or something like that. So 50% less like bosses will deal 50% less abilities to you in general if you're able to hit the threshold of max concentration equal to 40% of their max life. The way that this works is kind of like shock. Basically, you have to hit a certain threshold in order to shock a certain percentage, and that's what this is. The reason it's like that is just so that, like, you can't just go in with like an ability that doesn't hit hard but get maximum concentration. And yeah, unlike shock though, it doesn't increase the more you hit an enemy. Kind of just like you have to hit thresholds, as far as I understood, but I don't really understand it very well, so take what I said with a grain of salt. No Mercy, deal up to 30% more damage to enemy based on their missing concentration. So yeah, potentially 30% more damage to bosses. It's pretty good. Obsessive Ritual, you gain source reward, but you have less armor and evasion rating, 50% less. Which is a massive downside. What source reward does, some of it is hidden behind my camera, but it passively manifests a protective barrier which takes elemental damage from hits from you until it's depleted. The barrier instantly recharges to its full value after a short time. Not really specified how long, but short time after it stops taking damage or is fully depleted. So it kind of works like energy shield recharge in that way, but I don't know how long it will take for it to recharge. I think it's going to be kind of like a longer number because it seems pretty good otherwise, right? Seems like a really good one. So 6 is pretty decent. And then you have 50% increased effect of sorcery reward, and sorcery reward recovers 50% faster as well. So it'll be stronger and it'll come back faster. So good stuff. Zealous Inquisition is the juice. This is like what everybody wants. It's the explode. 10% chance for enemies you kill to explode, dealing 100% of their maximum life as physical damage. If you know anything about PoE 1, you know how strong explode is. 10% is very low value, but it is doubled against undead or demons, which, if I remember correctly, it used to say tripled, right, chat? Like, this used to say tripled, if I remember correctly, because I was like really excited about this. But undead and demons, pretty much everything in Path of Exile is undead or demon, aside of like beasts. But if you're doing like Delirium, if you're doing Breach, anything like that, it's basically going to be 20% chance to explode at 100% of their damage. It's really, really good node. So yeah, it is overall a pretty good Ascendancy, but this hinges on the fact that like you have to play into the class fantasies in Path of Exile 2. And I personally am not a massive enjoyer of what the mercenary gameplay looks like. First of all, because you have to reload a bunch of skills, and secondly, because you have to aim your grenades so that they roll and then their duration expires when monsters are over them. It kind of feels like it might be a little bit tedious, but if your grenades are able to, you know, explode almost instantly, then it could be very interesting. And of course, there's going to be so many interesting skill combinations that you'll be able to play around with or any of that kind of stuff. So if you like alien shooter type games where you're just running around shooting stuff, then this is a good ascendancy for you. If it were me, I would 100% go for the concentration nodes and the Culling Strike nodes. They just seem very, very strong, the Culling Strike and concentration nodes. But the sad part is that you're kind of gatekept by the Culling Strike, right? Like, you have to take the Explode. So what do you drop? You have to drop Culling Strike and Decimating Strike. One is after the other. So what do you take then? Well, you want to take Explode and most likely probably Sorcery Ward or something like that. It's a bit tricky actually. Or you'll just take Culling Strike and not Decimating Strike. It's a bit awkward, honestly, like how you're gonna be fitting it. So yeah, I would probably go like 4 or 5. Or I suppose you could drop 5 and just take 2 and 3. So you would go 4, 2, 3, 8. Or you go 4, 5, 2, 8. Yeah, I could see that. Something like that. So that could be kind of interesting. Yeah, that's Witchhunter. Just wanted to add to the Witchhunter that concentration actually like really synergizes well with Decimating Strike because you're able to stack the concentration much better, like the concentration break much better because of the fact that you're depleting X amount of like the boss's HP through just hitting it for the first time. So like if you were to actually hit it for 30% of its maximum life in one hit, that means that you're 10% HP away from getting max concentration break. And then the boss is basically going to have 50% less cooldown recovery rate of all its abilities, and you're going to be dealing 30% more damage with no mercy, so it's pretty good. But that would only work if removed is equal to hit. So it's... yeah. If Decimating Strike counts as a hit, then that's how it would work. But if it doesn't count as a hit, then it doesn't work because break enemy concentration on hit equals to 100% of the damage dealt. So it's kind of cope actually to think that it would actually work that way, but it could work that way. Gemling Legionnaire. This ascendancy is really interesting because it really hinges on how good the qualities are of skills. Now, I heard that the gem qualities in Path of Exile 2 are very, very good. So, for example, I've heard that the Archmage quality scales this spell gains 5% of damage as lightning to 7%. So it's an extra 2%. So it's a 40% increase of the gem itself, which presumably is going to be most of your damage on an Archmage build. So yeah, it's scaled to 7%. And if you were to get another 10% from Gemling, then you get another 1% on top of that. So that's pretty good. Though we'll have to see like what kind of thresholds we have, because what if there's like extra projectiles or extra chains or reduced fuse time for grenades or stuff like that, right? Like we don't know what the gems are. They haven't actually spoiled any of them, and we haven't actually been able to see any qualities based off of the beta, early access, or whatever the hell people are playing, because GCPs are end game items. They're very rare from what we know, GCPs. So this even increases the effectiveness of this node by a bit, because getting extra quality when GCPs are like very precious, you know, it's pretty good. But I think there's going to be a lot of really crazy qualities in Path of Exile 2 based off of everything that I've heard so far. So that's going to be like node number 1 right there. And then node number 2 is going to be +1 to all of skill levels. Skill levels, you know, presumably is going to give you a ton of damage. And who knows what the scaling is like, but I think the scaling in Path of Exile 2 is much more focused on skill levels. So like skill levels are going to be much more impactful than they are in Path of Exile 1. That is speculation on my part, but I think it's going to be the case. Because generally, skill levels are things that people get, everybody gets, and I think GGG is trying their best to make the game more approachable for newer players, and gear is less approachable than just leveling a skill gem. So that means that people are just going to be getting more baseline power just by playing the game, which means it's more beginner friendly. But of course, in endgame, all of that is going to change, right? But that doesn't devalue this in endgame as well, because it's multiplicative with your gear. Yeah, it's just a very good node. And then we have Advanced Thaumaturgy, 30% less cost of skills, and skill gems have 30% more attribute requirement. Attributes are very scuffed. So you're gonna really be struggling on attributes in Path of Exile 2 in general. Like it's gonna be hard for you as a sorceress to equip strength gems, like, you know, stuff like that. It's gonna be just very hard for you to do that. So that's another bonus for Gemling, because Gemling not only, like, you know, this is 30% more attribute requirement, but it makes more sense later on because you'll see later on now. And grants 3 additional skill slots. I don't really know like how to feel about this, because I feel like we already have enough buttons to click, right? There's like so many buttons that you're clicking already on mercenaries, with reloading, grenades, rapid shot, explosive shot, freezing shot, like whatever you want, right? 3 additional slots. This is good because it plays into Thaumaturgical Infusion. So 4 and 6 are kind of like linked. You can use 2 copies of the same support gems in different skills. So potentially you have like 2 GMPs, or if there's like an insane support gem, you can use 2 of the same. And that's going to be number 5. It's going to be locked behind number 4, so 3 additional skill slots. Which is kind of sad, because I would rather that 5 was here, and then 4 was like, I would want 5 there and 4 there, because I would definitely want to grab like 2 support gems, but I don't think I'd want to grab 3 additional skill slots. But there is also this node called Thaumaturgical Infusion, which grants you maximum resistance per 4 support gem, which I think is kind of gimmicky, because it sort of incentivizes you to use support gems that you might not otherwise want to use. So it just feels like a bit of a gimmick to get maximum resistance. And even then, the payout of 1 resistance per 4 gems seems very weak, in my opinion. Now, whether this is going to be abusable or things like that, like, you know, the players always outsmart the developers in Path of Exile because the game is so open-ended. So it's very possible. But yeah, it seems like you need to have like very heavy investment on random gems that you might not otherwise use to get like 10% maximum resistance or something like that once you have the total like 12 skills, right? Because you have 9 plus 3, which is a total of 12. And the next one is going to be adaptive capability, which is a whole new branch of its own. So that's number 7 right there. And this gives you attribute requirements of gems can be satisfied by your highest attribute. If you take advanced thaumaturgy, you have to take advanced capability. And if you want to do anything to do with like the maximum resistance, you have to do this as well, because there's no way that you'll be able to afford attribute requirements if for like green and blue gems at the bottom side of the tree. I know you can swap your attributes over, but in general, attribute requirements seem to be a nuisance. You're gonna have to deal with them either through itemization or through your passive skill tree. And this is just gonna make it like a non-factor, basically, because you can just stack strength or anything. Strength ideally, because it gives you maximum life, right? And you're just able to basically just get any gem that you want that way. Enhanced effectiveness, inherent bonuses from intelligence, strength, and dexterity are doubled. That's pretty insane, because strength actually gives a ton of life. So stacking strength, you're just going to get a ton of flat life that way from just stacking a lot of strength. Now, I think Gemling is a great ascendancy, but it's a hard ascendancy because it doesn't have a clear sort of like class fantasy, right? You're still going to be playing crossbows and stuff like that because you're starting at the bottom side of the tree. And as I said earlier, like traveling to anywhere else in the tree is very hard. I would absolutely not recommend you start this like as a minion build. There's a lot of people saying playing Gemling minions, and I know there's like a couple of minion nodes here, but the rest of your nodes are going to be over here. You're going to be spending more than 20 nodes to travel out to relevant nodes, and by that point, the benefit of starting Gemling is offset by the fact that you've just wasted 20 passive skills trees, 20 passive skills to get to where you want to be. So Gemling, I think, is very good so long as you stay within your section of the tree. And yeah, it's potentially really, really strong for anything bow related, melee related, or you know, crossbow grenade related. So yeah. Overall, I think it's probably one of the most interesting ascendancies that they have shown us so far, since it's very open-ended. But at the same time, it's also a big question mark because there is no clear sort of playstyle for it as well, right? So it's not like you don't really know about gem qualities at all. We don't know what they do, how strong they are. We don't know how spirit qualities do or anything of the sort. We don't know how gem levels scale, and yeah, it's a big question mark. But it sounds like it could be fun, because what if you get additional chains? What if you get like if you get increased effectiveness of the skill gems that you're allocating, like that you're using, then it might be very, very strong. That's the TLDR for Gemling. Invoker looks really good. It looks nuts. Honestly, I think Invoker would be my second choice of Ascendancy on what to start. I really like it. Thematically, I really like it. And I also really like the nodes that it has. Some really interesting stuff on here, like some really build defining stuff, as well as just overall just extremely powerful stuff, right? I think lead me through grace is very interesting. It's like spirit stacking, because this Ascendancy likes to have meta gems as part of its, as part of its kit. I think it's really interesting. Like, assuming, I'm just going to throw a wild number out there, but assuming you have 1,000 energy shield on your armor, that's 166 spirit that you gain from this. I don't know, I haven't seen any evasion values, but presumably you can get higher numbers even if you go for a hybrid ES evasion chest. And the downside of that is that you cannot gain spirit from equipment, which I don't think really matters, because so far we've only seen it on scepters, which you would never use because you're melee focused on this Ascendancy. And ring implicits, and I think amulet implicits is the only place where I've saw them. But yeah, you will get like a lot of spirit to reserve your extra trigger style gems, and this Ascendancy plays really well with trigger style gems, as well as casting on crit and that kind of stuff. So I think Lead Me Through Grace, the first node here, is really, really good. And which feeds into and Protect Me from Harm, which grants you evasion rating, also grants physical damage reduction, which is crazy. So to reiterate, evasion rating in Path of Exile 2 works differently to Path of Exile 1. You can evade both spells and attacks. You cannot evade AoEs. So it's really strong because it counts as like both dodge, spell dodge kind of thing, but you can't dodge AoEs basically. The downside of this though is that you have 40% less evasion, which is a hefty downside, but I think it's generally fine, because the downside of evasion rating is that you don't have any damage reduction. And the upside of this is that you would gain damage reduction at the cost of some of your evasion. And as long as you have a bit of recovery to, get your HP back up before you take the next amount of damage, then it's pretty good. It's really hard to judge how good defenses are in the game, because we don't really know what the damage profile of monsters is in Path of Exile 2. We have absolutely no idea. It's much more easy to judge offenses because it's just more binary the way offenses work, like monster has a resistance or monster has armor, etc, etc. But defenses themselves, it all depends on how the damage profile of monsters and bosses. This could be really good, has very high potential. And then Faith is a Choice grants you the skill Meditate, and Meditate is basically a channeled ability that recharges energy shield and can overcharge your energy shield. Overcharge is like double the normal maximum. Channeling ends, the damage you take your energy shield is double its normal maximum. So, there's the downside where like you're taking more damage there. Sorry, the channeling ends when you take damage or your energy shield is double its normal maximum. So if you were to like channel this and you take damage, it stops you from channeling it. Or if you gain double your ES, then you stop channeling it. How fast you channel this, we don't really know. It looked kind of slow. In the reveals, honestly. It didn't look that good. So I think this one is very sus. I don't like Meditate. I wouldn't take Faith as a choice. Number 3, I wouldn't take that. Unless there are specific encounters which allow you to just sit there and recharge your ES. It could be, I mean, there might be niche encounters where you respec into that just to, yeah. But the rest of the Ascendancy looks so good that the opportunity cost of taking this node is pretty high. Even this one's like, even this one's pretty high opportunity cost. Then you have I Am Blizzard, which you're gonna gain like 10% of damage is extra cold, and I Am Thunder, 10% of extra lightning is extra damage is extra lightning. And you're going to be dropping a little bit of chilled ground when you shock or chill. Unbound Avatar is basically just like a damage amp. It doesn't say anything. It just says you gain Unbound Fury by inflicting elemental ailments with hits. Once you reach your maximum Unbound Fury, you consume it, become unbound. Which I think, you know, just you get more damage, basically, I suppose. That's cool. But this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Like the Soul Spring Eternal, meta skills gain 35% more energy. So basically, cast on crit or cast on freeze and stuff, you have to hit thresholds which are met by freezing and critting. And this just means that you're going to be triggering those meta skill gems 35% faster, which kind of plays into Lead Me Through Grace. But it's going to be a very meta skill gem focused type of tendency. And the craziest one of them all is Sunder My Enemies, which basically is Inquisitor from Path of Exile 1. Critical hits ignore non-negative enemy monster elemental resistances. I think the reason why they specify non-negative is just so that like you're not inconvenienced if a monster already has negative resistances because of one reason or another, or if you're playing in a party or something like that. But I don't think you'll be able to reduce them below negative if you have this node because of the way that resistances work. Like, for example, if you apply exposure minus 30%, it's going to be applied before this, I think. Speculation, but yeah. Still, it is an insane node. Like, it just basically means that you can play any element you want and never care about enemy monster resistances. But the downside is that in Path of Exile 2, we don't have as much critical strike chance as we do in PoE 1. So getting 100% is like so much harder than in PoE 1. And the last node is going to be Anti-Scatter the Wind, which grants you elemental expression and trigger elemental expression on melee critical hit. And elemental expression is kind of like it's basically like Wild Strike, I guess. It shoots out these things that deal damage. The numbers for them we don't know, and yeah, we don't know any of that sort of stuff just yet. So let me just see exactly what the wording is on elemental expression. It creates a fiery explosion of arcing bolts of lightning or icy waves projectiles. The chance for an explosion is proportional to your strength, for a bolt proportional to your dexterity, and a wave proportional to your int. But depending on which one of your attributes is higher, it's going to shoot either fire, lightning, or cold. Kind of interesting. But we don't know the numbers of this just yet as well. So it's a bit of a question mark. It could be interesting. So yeah. But Invoker is looking really, really good. I think Invoker would be like my second choice of Ascendancy. For sure, starting. It just looks really interesting. Looks really fun. Okay, the Acolyte of Chayula. It's my least favorite Ascendancy that they have revealed. I don't like it. That's just gonna go out saying that I think it's super weird. Well, weird doesn't necessarily mean bad, but I don't really see the massive benefit of it. But let's go through it. So the first thing is that you get Mana Leech's instant, which is cool. So getting access to Mana Leech is pretty cool, because the only other way to actually like leech mana is gonna be through physical damage. Then you cannot recharge Energy Shield, which kind of sucks. But Mana Leech effects also recover Energy Shield. So if Leech is really strong, which I don't know if it is, because Leech is currently in Path of Exile 2 capped at 1 Leech instance, which means that instant Leech is actually really good. It bypasses that. So it makes Leech a lot less bad because of the fact that it's instant, but we don't know how Leech is yet calculated. So it's impossible to know specifically how much Energy Shield we're gonna be getting. So the question is, where do we get Leech as an Acolyte of Chayula? Because it doesn't seem like we're getting Leech anywhere, right? On the tree, like you have to get like physical Leech or something like that, or support gem, Mana Leech. That is true. We can get it from a support gem. So Leech. Let's see. We have life leech, sure. 3% of physical attack damage. But the mana leech is also physical attack damage. Leech 2% of physical attack damage from supported skills as mana. That severely limits what you can do with this, because it means that you can only play physical attack damage builds. Because I don't think there's any leech on the passive skill tree. If there's mana leech on the passive skill tree, that means that Archmage is completely broken. And Mind Over Matter as well. But I don't necessarily feel like that is the case. So you're spending 2 Ascendancy nodes, like half of your Ascendancy for this, and it doesn't even give you mana leech. That seems crazy to me. That absolutely seems crazy to me. Because not only do you have to spend half of your Ascendancy for this, but you then on top of that, also have to get a support gem for it too, right? It's just crazy. But so the question is, yeah, do the small nodes give you leech? Who knows, right? I don't really know whether the small nodes give you leech or not. So 1 and 2 is pretty dead. Yeah, small nodes cope, exactly. And we have number 3 is Chayula's Gift. Gives 10% to maximum chaos resistance. Chaos resistance is doubled. Yeah, could be really good. Depends on how hard it is to get chaos resistance and stuff. But again, an Ascendancy node for this. Depends as well on the damage profile of monsters, how much chaos damage you're going to be dealing. Big question mark at the moment. Here we go. We have a little bit of damage. So Reality Rending. You gain, chance to gain damages extra chaos. So it's just more damage. I don't know exactly what that equals out to in total, but it's more damage. That's pretty cool. Not really much to say about that one, really. It might be really good if like Wither is still a thing in Path of Exile 2, but I don't really know whether Wither is really a thing like it is in Path of Exile 1. And Waking Dream grants you the skill Into the Breach. This could be interesting because it's kind of like the flavor of the Ascendancy. Into the Breach grants so creates a breach around you, allowing you to see nearby flames of Chayula. You're considered to be in a breach while this is active. And what it does is collecting flames of Chayula grants the following bonuses. Red Flame grants you 7% of your maximum life leech to you. Blue Flame grants you 7% of your maximum mana to you. And Purple Flames of Chayula grants you a stacking buff granting 7% damage as chaos damage for 5 seconds. So it can stack up to 10 times. So you could technically have 70% of damage as extra chaos damage, which is insane. It's actually insane. But that means that you'd have to be playing like... Yeah, you're just like tap dancing basically the whole time trying to collect your little buffs. Yeah, I mean... I don't really understand how long Blue Flame is gonna last. Because it doesn't specify. Is Blue Flame also gonna be lasting 5 seconds? If that's the case and you can collect a Blue Flame every 5 seconds, then that pretty much solves the mana leech issue, right? Same with the Red Flame, it solves the life leech issue, so that could be pretty good. You have to go into 5 to basically enable 1 and 2. Yeah. And then we have Lucid Dreams, and effects and duration of Chayula, Flame of Chayula on you is doubled, which means that you could technically get 140% of damage as extra chaos damage. Pretty strong. Yeah, mechanically I don't really understand how this works, so I can't really be the judge of this buff. Red Flame of Chayula leaches 7% of your maximum life to you. Yeah, it could be that you just, when you pick it up, it just gives you 7% of your life over 1 second back. It's probably not even giving you leech. It's just leeching 7% of your life back to you. Which is actually honestly like very disappointing if it works that way. Which is, it's probably much more likely that it works that way. But this is the Ascendancy that just keeps disappointing, in my opinion. Aside for, of course, the damage is extra chaos, it might be busted, but I don't know. I really don't know. Embrace the Darkness removes all spirit. This right here is the most troll Ascendancy ever. Like, removing all your spirit sucks. Base maximum darkness is 100. For each life or energy shield lost to damage, reserve 1 darkness instead if possible. Darkness reservation lasts for 10 seconds and +5 maximum darkness per level. So assuming you're getting level 100, you're going to have a total of 600 darkness. And if you take 600 damage, that means that your darkness reservation is locked in for 10 seconds. That is crazy. For 10, it's a 10-second. It's basically like having like, like Witchhunter's shield for damage, but way worse. It feels like it just seems so bad because of this like 10-second reservation. Now I think like what's gonna happen is that if you take 100 damage, it's gonna start to count down 10 seconds from the moment you take it. So it's not like you have to stop taking damage for 10 seconds to recover. It's more like it's gonna recover however much damage you took 10 seconds ago, like 10 seconds later. It's not as bad as like, like the recharge like energy shield or something like that, but it just seems so troll. And then Grasp of the Void, gain 1% of extra chaos damage per 20 on reserve darkness, which if there's any kind of chip damage in Path of Exile 2 in maps and stuff, like that's going to be reserved like pretty much all the time. But for bosses, this could be really good. If you're a god gamer and you could just like just dodge everything and never take darkness damage, it could be very strong because you'll just get a bunch of chaoses extra. Not bad. Then you have Inner Silence, which has a 50% reduction of darkness reservation duration. So you have to employ another Ascendancy to reduce this to 5 seconds. And I feel like this should just be baseline part of Embrace the Darkness or something, because you're spending, like, you can only take 4 of these notables. But which ones do you take? You have to take all of this, and then you're left with what? What are you left with? Like Chayula's Gift? Waking Dream? I feel like you have to take Waking Dream. If you don't take Waking Dream of the Chonk, it's gonna be really weird. I feel like the entire Ascendancy is like Waking Dream, node number 5. And then the rest is just really weird. I don't know. I just think it's really weird. And the funny thing about Waking Dream as well is that on top of it being like not super powerful outside of the damages extra, is that you have to play this playstyle of picking up your buffs as they drop all around you. So you're kind of just like playing carrot on a stick, walking around trying to get your Chayula buffs or whatever, which to me sounds cringe. Especially if your build hinges on like that damage for like, if you need that damage. Yeah. Doesn't sound very good. I think the Deadeye is going to be like one of the strongest Ascendancies. Genuinely, I think Deadeye is the least hipster. Like it's funny because Deadeye is like the most popular Ascendancy for soft core blasters in Path of Exile 1. But the thing about Deadeye in Path of Exile 2 is that it's quite boring because not much changed. People want to play new stuff, right? So this would be like the least interesting Ascendancy. But my counter argument to that is that the bow skills are very interesting. There's some really cool stuff for bows. I think bows are very strong, and I think there's some really cool skills for bows. Also, Tailwind has now been specified to actually increase attack and cast speed, movement speed, and evasion rating. So yeah, we know that it's going to be granting you buffs to evasion rating, but when you do get hit, you lose it. So it's going to be really sad to lose that. Now, I predict that Deadeye, I'm not really sure if you're going to be taking Gathering Winds because I'm not really sure how well you're going to be able to keep that up. And also because I feel like since all projectiles in Path of Exile 2 shotgun, you're going to be wanting to stand close to targets to deal damage. Like your maximum damage is going to be when you're close and when all your projectiles from your bow shoot and hit one target. So I think Point Blank is back on the menu as opposed to Far Shot, right? So yeah, if all projectiles shotgun, Point Blank Deadeye is probably where it's at. Now let's look through the nodes. Avidity grants you a 30% chance that if you would gain a frenzy charge, you instead gain up to your maximum number of frenzy charges, which is pretty damn insane because frenzy charges function a lot different than they do in Path of Exile 1. They grant you much more huge buffs for the skills, but are consumed when you use those skills. So for example, if we were to look at like Rain of Arrows, Rain of Arrows fires 100% more arrows if a frenzy charge was consumed, and it also fires 50% more arrows per frenzy charge consumed. It's crazy amounts of more arrows, and it already fires 53 base arrows at level 14. Yeah, level 14. It's gonna shoot like what, like 200 arrows if you have 3 frenzy charges, right? Like that's crazy. Of course, like don't look at the, I keep clicking that. Don't look at the Rain of Arrow numbers and think like this is gonna be crazy, because we have no idea how good this is gonna be. Because the numbers are completely just like, they could just change it from one day to another. They could just change all the numbers tomorrow and, you know, it all goes out the window. But then we have Three-Link Chase, which benefits from consuming frenzy charges for your skills, have a chance to be doubled. I'm kind of confused. I have a 50% chance to be doubled. Okay, yeah. If it's a 50% chance to be doubled, that's pretty good. Again, going back to the example of Rain of Arrows, is that 50% chance for 100% for this to be doubled, 50% chance for 200. Are we gonna be seeing like a 1,000 arrow Rain of Arrows? Like that sounds insane, right? So these could be really interesting, but it all depends on what bonuses we get from the skill gems themselves. Skill gems have yet not been released, so yeah, we'll have to see. And then Eagle Eyes grants you no accuracy penalty at distance. So accuracy in Path of Exile 2, the closer you are to a target, the more accurate you are, and the further away you are from the target, the less accurate you are. Don't really know how accuracy is going to work and like how far, you know, or how close you're going to need to be to accuracy cap, but the big question mark. The Eagle Eyes, not really sure about that one, to be honest. But then there's Point Blank and Far Shot here at 4, and you can see that it's like you choose either or. And Point Blank is going to make you deal 20% more damage if the target hits in the first 3.5 meters of their movement, scaling down with distance traveled, reaching 0 after 7 meters. And I believe I had... one second. Right, there it is. So 3.5 meters is this 35. So as long as you're within, you know, from here to here, you gain maximum effect of Point Blank. But then by the time the arrow gets to here, it has no additional bonus damage, basically. So yeah, you want to be close to targets. Also, because I just think since you are going to be able to shotgun with any of your abilities, you want to be close regardless. I think Point Blank might be very strong because of how it functions. And then what's behind it is Endless Munitions, which you might think compared to Path of Exile 1 is like nerfed, since in Path of Exile 1 we get 2 projectiles from this. And now we get 1. But since you can shotgun, projectiles are like adding projectiles is now just that much more powerful. Kind of like the equivalent of adding a projectile to Tornado Shot. Yeah, it's gonna be very, very good. Path of Exile 2. And the rest we have Called Shots. You can apply an additional mark. Could be interesting, though don't know if there are ways to like apply marks that more easily, you know, like mark on hit or things like that. Yeah, I don't believe we have seen any sort of like mark on hit skill gems or anything like that. Marks are very strong, like marks are really good, but automating them, bit of a question mark. You can probably just use like cast on crit, cast on freeze and stuff like that, but you gotta realize that that reserves 100 spirit. 100 spirit is a lot. But let me actually see, because yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know how that plays out. We'll have to see how you apply marks. So whether you take this or not will all depend on if you're okay with casting marks, you know, manually casting them, or if there's an easy way to trigger them. We'll have to figure that out. Now, Gathering Winds and Wind Ward are amazing in a vacuum. These are really, really strong. Tailwind is back to being really good, and we can actually go look at the Ranger here. So we have a more high quality resolution variant of it. So if I open this up, I'll just copy and paint. Easier that way. You can see Tailwind is a stacking buff which grants 1% increased movement speed, 3% increased skill speed. Skill speed is both attack, cast speed, as well as Warcry speed, as far as we know so far. And also grants 15% increased evasion rating per stack for 10 seconds. This refreshes when you gain another stack. So basically you just like, you attack 10 times and you keep that up. But there's also skills that barrage. So if you were to barrage like 10 projectiles, this stacks up your Tailwind to 10 in one shot. If you attack 10 times, like your barrage attacks 10 times. You can actually stack it pretty decently fast with the barrage. And but the problem with that is that Tailwind, you now drop Tailwind anytime you're hit, which is tragic. It's absolutely tragic. See, lose all Tailwind when hit. That is terrible. That is super sad. So there's kind of like not really good synergy with Point Blank here on Tailwind. And in general, it really just depends like how the playstyle will be, how fast monsters are gonna be, and whether you're gonna have like be able to keep Tailwind up is a big question mark. But I don't think it's gonna be very good, unfortunately. But Wind Ward grants 3% less damage taken per Tailwind, so technically 30% less damage taken. If you are able to get your stacks up to 10 and you take damage, that damage is going to be reduced by 30%. It's OP. It's pretty good. But, you know, just don't get it, I guess, which is, honestly, I think it's going to be really hard to do in Path of Exile 2. Alright, we got Pathfinder. Pathfinder is insane, I think. I think it's like, if you want to play Poison, this class is crazy. Very strong. Concoctions might also be insane, but get to see the full numbers. Let me just bring up a Pathfinder screenshot here so we can actually see all the text, and I can just like zoom in and paint. Like a little bit more legible. Alright, but we'll get back to that later. Number one, the pathing through the right. Connected chemistry, 50% more charges gained, which I think is gonna be kind of mandatory if you're playing a concoction build. Yeah, 50% more charges gained, cool. Number two is enduring elixirs. Life effects are not removed when when unreserved life is filled. Life flask effects do not queue. I mean, the do not queue kind of sucks. That would really suck. But this is great. This is good. This is good. Like, this recovery is very good. Especially if you gain a lot of flash charges and you have base charge generation. That's pretty good. I mean, these are very strong for recovery purposes, right? And recovery seems to be like very scarce in PoE 2. Then we have enduring elixirs. Life flask effects are not removed. Sorry, my brain. I've been reading too many passive skill notes today. So contagion contamination. The most damaging poison on enemies you kill spreads to other enemies within a 1.5 meter radius. But we were actually just sent something from a Twitch chatterman's, which says there's a Herald of Plague, as you can see here, which basically does the exact same thing for a spirit reservation of 30, which is super low. This is actually kind of sad to see that an ascendancy that is leading into something else, which you have to take, is provided by a very cheap reservation. That seems very, very, like, that's kind of toxic, honestly. Like, oh, you just get 30 spirit reservation, you get this ascendancy, but you have to take this ascendancy anyways, because you have to go to number 4, because this is the craziest ascendancy in the entire game. Like, this alone is double damage, right? I'll explain a little bit as to why that's the case. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame that contagious contamination is now basically just a spirit reservation that you can have. Do they stack? I don't know if they stack. It could be that they stack, but it's not likely that they stack. If it wouldn't make sense that they stacked. Then we have Brute for Concoction, which is the poisonous, fulminating, shattering, explosive, and bleeding concoctions. We can go look at what they do. So I'm not gonna read the top part, but you're unarmed, you deal chaos damage in an area. Poison inflicted by this skill has more effect. How much more effect? No idea. And the same applies for the lightning one. Lightning attack deal in an area, inflicting lightning exposure. That's pretty good, because exposure is potentially the only way to get below negative resistance in the game right now. If you have a lot of penetration and then you get this on top, you can go below. Pretty good. Shattering Concoction grants cold exposure and obviously does cold damage. Fire exposure deals fire damage. And bleeding, dealing physical damage to an attack in an area. Bleeding inflicted by this skill has more effect. Well, how much more we don't know, but concoctions seem like honestly really strong. One thing to note though is that bleeds and poisons, you cannot stack multiple of them unless otherwise specified. So unlike in PoE 1 where you can stack poisons infinitely depending on like how fast you hit and that kind of stuff, in PoE 2 you're capped to 1, and then you can have additional stacks if you spec into that. So that's what the next node is, which is sorry, not the next, but the previous node was, which was Overwhelming Toxicity, which doubles the number of poisons you can inflict on an enemy. But this node is insane. Like doubling the effect of the amount of poisons you can inflict is crazy, because presumably you can get like 5 additional poisons through gear and skill gems and stuff like that, and this would double that to 10. The downside is that you have less poison duration, so you have to hit fast enough to where you can stack up those 10 poisons within their duration to get maximum damage. But yeah, so you'll have to kind of balance the downside of less poison duration, and you'll have to hit fast enough to where you can stack those 10 poisons. But it's very, very strong. I think poisons are gonna be very insane in Path of Exile 2. Like genuinely, I think Pathfinder is one of the strongest Ascendancies for sure. And then this one is pretty interesting. Traveler's Vision, it just grants 5 passive skill points. Now, assuming a passive skill point grants about 3% damage per point, I mean, that's like 15% damage, but it could be the make or break for certain builds. I don't know. Ran out of ideas? I don't really know if they ran out of ideas. It's a pretty interesting node, but yeah, I think we'll be plenty point starved, by the way. So yeah, 5 passive skill points. It's kind of lame. It really is. But then we have 7 and 8, which is these two here. 30% less movement speed penalty when using a skill while moving. It's pretty cool. And your speed is unaffected by slows. I don't know if I would waste half of my Ascendancy for that, but they're alright. They're not bad. Yeah, it's alright. But for sure, you would go Overwhelming and Contagious Contamination. And if you want to play Poison Concoction, you would then grab that. And I think Connected Chemistry and Enduring Elixir is really strong. But if you are playing like a pure poison build, you would go 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? You go 1, 2, 3, and 4, yeah. That's this, like, it's crazy, these form. You get like really good recovery and you get really good damage from your poisons. Alright, so Bloodmage is the Ascendancy I think is the coolest Ascendancy in the game at the moment. It's the Ascendancy I'm gonna be starting. I'm sold. It looks so good. I'm very happy. It looks good. But it has a massive downside in that to play this class, you have to pass through Sanguimancy, which grants skill life remnants. And also, an additional downside is that skills gain base life cost equals to base mana cost. So basically, you just double your cost. It's going to be life and mana cost. However, there is an upside to this in that Sanguimancy, you guys can see over here in the middle of the screen. Sorry, there's a lot of tooltips, but Sanguimancy grants life remnants, and it's the skill. Basically, what it does is you cast a skill. It procs on crit, and it has a cooldown of 1 second, and then it heals you when you pick that up. and this can overflow, and overflow is double your life. Whether we can scale that like further, I'm not exactly sure. Like I don't know how much life you can scale this, but it is supportable. You will be able to support it. So yeah, hopefully you're able to get like additional buffs from picking up your orbs. You know, like I don't know if there's like interesting buffs that you can support this with, but yeah, it's just a way for you to get like a buff when you walk over your little orb. But the reason why I think this Ascendancy is so strong is because of Vitality Siphon. Well, there are various reasons, but I think Vitality Siphon, which is the only way in the game as we know of right now, I would be very disappointed to find out if there was more ways to get Spell Leech. But it's the only way right now that we know in the game where you can get Spell Leech. Now, 10% of spell damage is leeched as life. Means that you're just going to be topping yourself up basically all the time, right? And there are many interesting things that you could do with this. But the main thing is that it's just going to be your recovery. That's how you stay alive. Hopefully, or, you know, we're just going to be potentially anointing instant leech as well, so that it's going to top us up even further that way. But if there are ways for you to like overflow life, you'll be able to do that as well through your life leech. And it's really good because overflow feeds into Gore Spike, which is here, 1% increased critical damage per bonus 40 maximum life. I am not 100% certain whether it works this way, but based off of wording, Gore Spike is going to give you damage depending on even your overflowed life. If you have 4,000 life, or yeah, if you have like 4,000 life, that's going to give you 100% increased critical damage bonus. And if that overflows to 8,000, that's 200% increased critical damage bonus. So that's a lot of damage that you get from Gore Spike. And it also motivates you to build a lot of life on this build. So you get double scaling from building defenses, which is really, really nice. Generally, that's really, really nice in all RPGs to have that kind of mechanic. But then we have open source, curses have infinite duration. I think this sucks simply because I think Blasphemy in Path of Exile 2 looks to be very, 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 very strong. So if you have Blasphemy, you don't need to have infinite duration curses. I don't think it's going to be that good. Unfortunately, open source, unless there is a mechanic, something to do with infinite duration curses, or who knows. But a node that is like super interesting and build defining is Blood Barb. This is crazy. It gives you 10% of damage as extra physical damage, but it also gives you elemental damage, also contributes to bleeding magnitude. And what this leads into is so we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Is it not actually written here? Wait, one sec. It contributes to bleeding magnitude. Wait, it's not on this. Hang on. Bleeding magnitude. Where is that node? The other node. Right. I mean, no. Yeah. So sorry. Let me refresh. It's just because the wording gets me a little bit confused. But the TLDR is that you'll just be able to bleed with this. With elemental damage. Like, you can make elemental damage bleed builds. I was trying to double check that I didn't get things wrong. Because, like, of the fact that it just says bleeding magnitude. But, yeah. It's essentially like all your elemental damage can bleed. Which is crazy. It's as crazy as it sounds. I think ailments in Path of Exile 2 are going to be like really, really OP. I think like you can make like a Bloodmage fire damage build that crits and also inflicts bleeds and ignites at the same time. That could be really cool. That could be a build. Like a fire crit bleed build. The Blood Barb's really strong. Then we have Sunder Flesh, which makes your base critical hit chance for spells to be 15%. This is really strong on fire skills specifically because they have the lowest base critical strike chance of all spells. But cold spells have around 12 to 13%. So it's not going to be good for cold spells, but it'll be really good for fire spells. For spells that don't necessarily have high base critical strike chance. Thunder Flesh is really interesting, but only applicable, like, it's only good if you're playing like fire or lightning, I suppose. Grasping Wounds is basically Progenesis as an Ascendancy. So 25% of life loss from hits is prevented. That much life is lost over 4 seconds, which ideally, if you have enough spell leech, will be just completely offset. So it's 25% damage reduction. Now the downside of this is like, unlike Path of Exile 1, you can't scale it with flask effect, so it's just 25% static, but it's still really good. It's still really, 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 really good. It's still really good. And it's really good because this is an Ascendancy that focuses on recovery. So having the life leech kind of offsets this. Now, the only thing that is a bit concerning is that in Path of Exile 2, you can only stack one life leech instance. And how life leech works, it's still a little bit unknown. I'm still going into this not exactly knowing how much life leech I'm going to be able to get, but hopefully it'll feel good enough to where, you know, you're just recovering your life and just chilling. Crimson Power, gain energy shields from equipped body armor is maximum life. The insane node that feeds into your gore spike. But the problem is with this Ascendancy is that like everything is good, so what do you take? Since you technically only have access to 3 Ascendancy nodes as opposed to 4 from other classes. So what would you take? Gore spike? Do you take the bleed? Or do you take and you have to take the leech, and that's basically it, right? Like bleed, leech, gore spike. Or you take gore spike, leech, and base crit or something. Or I don't know, 25% of life loss is prevented, right? So it's just too good. It's just too good. And that is why I'm starting this Ascendancy, because I think it has the most generic type of damage profile, in that critical damage applies to everything. You can now critically damage and inflict ailments with that, and that will scale the ailments. It just seems like the most versatile spellcaster in Path of Exile 2, and also has good recovery. So that is why I'm going Bloodmage and why I think it's good. And last but not least, the Infernalist, which is really, really interesting. Mechanically, like, this is probably one of the most interesting Ascendancies that they have showcased. Like, there is more text in this Ascendancy, like in one of these nodes, than the entire Pathfinder Ascendancy, pretty much. Like, it's you know, just to give an example of just how complex I suppose it is. But Altered Flesh gives you 20% of cold damage taken as fire, 20% of lightning damage taken as fire, 20% of physical damage taken as chaos damage. So everything is good up until the last line. The last line is a bit of a question mark, because how are you going to be capping your chaos resistance? I'm not really sure. We'll have to see how much resistance we have access to in Path of Exile 2. Again, it's really hard to judge defenses in Path of Exile 2 because we don't know what the damage profile of monsters is going to be. So Altered Flesh could be really, really good, but it's still a bit of a question mark. I hope that there's things like, I think we've seen all keystones, so I don't think it's going to be happening anytime soon, but like, I think Tempered by War is the name of the keystone that I'm thinking of, which is from the Karui jewel, the Legion jewel. Makes you take 50% of elemental damage as fire. So if there's ways for you to shift all your damage to fire, then, you know, attack maximum fire resistance or whatever else, you'll be able to like mitigate elemental damage really well with Altered Flesh. But we don't know that just yet, like what is it, whether we're gonna get that from uniques or anything like that. Then we have 2, 3, and 4, which are similar to each other, and they're kind of just like sitting here. So you have the choice between those 3 if you path into 1, which is the Altered Flesh node. We have Bedat's Gaze, Bedat's Will, and Bedat's Hands. Reserve 25% of life, and you gain 1 maximum mana per 6 maximum life, or 1 maximum spirit per 25 life, and 1 maximum energy heal per 8 life, which is also kind of like alluding to the fact that this will be like a pretty decent maximum life stacking Ascendancy. But I mean, so you can actually go here and take all these, and that's all the points that you're able to take, because that's 4 notables. I think you'll probably pick and choose one or the other. The maximum spirit one seems pretty good, because so far the spirit gems look to be pretty strong. So yeah, maximum spirit could be very good. Maximum mana as well. Maybe if you want to be playing like an Archmage build on the Infernalist, it could be a thing. And yeah, like moving on to the next nodes, we have Demonic Possession, which grants Demon Form. And Demon Form is a way for you to get basically like this form that grants you increasing damage, but it makes you also take increasing damage. Alright, so demon form, you shapeshift into a demon, you vastly boost the power of your spells. How much that is, I don't really know. We need to know more specifics. You gain demon flame every second you remain in demon form, causing your life to be lost at an ever-increasing rate. Revert to human form if you reach 1 life. Use a skill that isn't a spell, or reactivate this skill. So it's kind of like if you guys ever played like Berserk in Path of Exile 1, you can't keep it up indefinitely, right? Like it'll just be the duration. Basically, you can kind of offset this by having high recovery rate or leech or something, but you can't stay in demon form forever, and there is a cooldown, and the cooldowns seem to be pretty big. From what I saw, it was like at least 10-second cooldown. So you will have troubles keeping it up for sure. You will not keep it up the entire time. So yeah, I think like that node specifically has a little bit of performance issues, and it's a bit of a question mark how strong it is and whether the downside is offsettable to the point where you can actually create a build around it. It's really, really unknown. Really unknown. So yeah. It'll be interesting. It is not like RF. No, RF damages you the same. Like you know how much RF is gonna damage you in 5 seconds, whereas the skill is just ever increasing, so you cannot keep it up. It's impossible to keep it up. At some point you will degen, and you will basically put yourself down to 1 life. And another downside with this is like when you are 1 life, you're extremely vulnerable. So you come out of demon form, and if a monster breathes on you, you're just dead, which is weird. Because in Path of Exile 2, if you fail a map, it's gone. And if you fail a boss, it's also gone. So yeah, bit of a question mark, that one. Then we have 6, which is the node right there, which is behind demon form, which grants maximum 10 demon flame, which demon flame, I guess, is like the power granted by demon form. So yeah, you get demon flame every second. So that means that you'll just like go in and you'll already deal a lot more damage than if you didn't have that node. So yeah, demon flame, when you enter it, it's pretty binary. The next node is really interesting. You got Pyromantic Pact. Maximum mana is replaced by maximum Infernal Flame. Gain Infernal Flame instead of spending mana for skill cost. Take maximum life and energy shield as fire damage when Infernal Flame reaches maximum. Lose all Infernal Flame on reaching maximum Infernal Flame. I know it's a mouthful, this one. 10% of Infernal Flame lost per second if none was gained in the past 2 seconds. So Infernal Flame, the way that I see it, it's a buff, basically. It's a buff. You want to be spending mana, but you don't want to be spending too much mana. So you're going to be managing how much mana you spend, and you want to stay relatively above 50%, but below 100%. So you kind of want to sync up your cast time so that your mana never goes beyond 100%, but it doesn't go below 50%, which seems very finicky, especially for any build that you want to be starting with. But the upsides seem to be pretty good, but it's not something that I would consider to be a starting node. Like, I would never put this in my build to begin with until I know exactly how to tune it according to, how to tune it for my build. Because I do think that, like, a lot of people might just click this node and end up killing themselves in game, of course. So it just, they'll just end up dying, and that's it. It'll be very interesting to see. It's gonna be kind of like a little bit of a noob check, this one. And as much as I think noob checks are funny, I don't necessarily think it's gonna play very well with the noobs. But then we have the next one is Bringer of Flame. While not low on Infernal Flames, as I was saying, while you're not below 50%, all damage from your hits and your allies in your presence contribute to ignite chance and magnitude. So that means that you'll be able to ignite with all of your hits, and also your minions will be able to ignite with all of their hits, so long as you're above 50% Infernal Flame. And Seething Body, while high Infernal Flame, which high Infernal Flame I believe is also above 50%. So as we're saying, above 50%, you and your allies gain 20% of damage as extra fire. Yeah. Honestly, from my opinion, is that you're using 3/4 of your ascendancy for this, but you have a massive downside that you have to manage. And the upside is like something that, for example, if you go look at Stormweaver, Stormweaver gets to shock for with no downside, right? Although, of course, shock is not as powerful as ignite, because ignite is a genuine damage source, whereas shock is a non-damaging ailment. But it seems like a massive downside to have to manage in order to enable or facilitate a type of playstyle. And on top of that, if you ever mismanage your resource, if you go above 100% and your Infernal Flame is reset, not only do you take damage, but you also are not able to then ignite, right? So you have to like sit there and cast a couple times to get your Infernal Flame above 50% again, in order to then gain the buffs of Bringer of Flame and Seething Body once again. So it's like, it's hella punishing. It's so punishing to not manage your resources well. And that is why I think it's going to be a massive noob check. Because like, if you don't manage your resources well, you basically deal no damage and you kill yourself. So yeah, I have to see how this goes, how this works in practice. That's not to say that Infernalist isn't cool. I think it's one of the coolest Ascendancies that we've seen so far. Yeah. Then we have Loyal Hellhound, which summons an Infernal Hellhound. You gain 20% damage reduction basically when it's alive, because 20% of the damages that you would take is instead transferred to your Hellhound. We can see here, reviving Infernal Hellhound, so if it dies, it just revives after set duration, ignites enemies near it, and the Hellhound takes a portion of the damage from hits from you. How much to ignite it deals, don't really know. So that's still up for speculation. And yeah, but it's really nice. It's just 20% damage reduction. It gives you an avenue to have kind of like an RF. You're basically a Righteous Fire aura. And if you support this minion and you increase minion damage and that kind of stuff, I think this is the closest that you'll ever get to Righteous Fire in Path of Exile. Unless, of course, they introduce it later on when they give us when they give us the Templar skill gems and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a cool node. I think I'm guessing, is Pox going Infernalist chat? Just, I guess, I mean, it's RF, right? What is Pox decided? Anyways, we have Grinning Immolation as well, which become ignited when you deal a critical hit. Right, so you're igniting yourself, taking 15% of life and energy shield as fire damage per second. This is like a genuinely suicidal Ascendancy. Like, it just wants to die. Like, that's what this Ascendancy wants to do. What is this? But you gain 30% more critical damage bonus. Bro, like, you need to have... That is just, I don't know. That is such a big downside. That is such... You're just 15% of your life and energy shield as fire damage per second. That is such a big downside. You need to have so much regeneration to enable this, but you do gain 30% more critical damage bonus, which, you know, I don't think this is very good. I think these nodes are really interesting. Alter Flesh, Betat's Gaze, Betat's Will, and Betat's Hand. They're really interesting. Demon Form as well could be absolutely insane. But the rest of these, it's kind of like a to be seen type of thing, and I also feel like it will just really be depending on whether we can actually get it to a point where we can tune this. But the way that I see this Ascendancy is it really feels like a Path of Building Ascendancy that you have to first really plan in PoE to play it in game for it to be good. So yeah, that's kind of it's a really interesting Ascendancy, but it has so many downsides. So that's the Infernalist, and that pretty much sums up all of the Ascendancies currently that were spoiled in the game. There's gonna be 12 more coming at some point in early access and presumably by release. So that is pretty much it for the Ascendancy so far. They look really cool. The coolest ones, in my opinion, are we have Deadeye, Gemling, Pathfinder, Bloodmage, Warbringer, Titan, Stormweaver, and of course the Bloodmage. Like I already said the Bloodmage, but I want to say it again. And the Invoker. Actually, now that I mention it, they're all pretty damn cool, aren't they? Except for Acolyte Chayula. Rest in peace, Acolyte Chayula. They're all pretty cool, aren't they? So yeah, I'm really excited, bro. They look really cool.